couple of things in my starting off with a characterization of both what this decline looks like and what the counterfactual is likely to look like, then moving into two arguments. The first one on how this perpetuates inequalities, and the second one on how this is extremely bad for legislation and the creation of legislation regarding AI. Okay, and then I'll summarize what I've proven. Starting off with some quick contextualization of how this round of how what this typically
Recording in
looks like.
progress.
So let's start with characterizing what open source development is. Open source development generally refers to the act of AI where everyone can use and work on it, and it is typically available to all that are able to available to all. By regretting the decline, we think the counterfactual likely looks like a world where open source AI models and the development of these open source models are still present or in an increasing trend. We think in this case, there are a couple of characteristics of this. It likely looks like open source development is vastly accessible, with anyone being able to use and work on it, and it's also typically free of any charge. They can also get the algorithm and any necessary models behind it in order to complete developments necessary. This phenomenon probably looks like taking the AI and changing parts of it in order to create a new model or things like that. Contrastingly, the decline of this looks like when open source development is no longer prominent, when it is on the decline, which means like open source AI in general is less accessible for all, and there's an increased barrier of entry to open source development, with the frequency and number of it appearing in the market in general also decreasing. With that said, I'll move into our two arguments about why we sincerely regret the decline of this and why this is quite bad. Starting off with how this perpetuates inequalities. Recognize that the decline in open source development necessarily means that more of AI development is done in a very limited way, where it's very exclusive and few people are able to access it in general. Recognize that this directly leads to a higher barrier of entry. For example, there are lots of things within AI and the development of AI models that require perhaps past work. Things like libraries, like algorithms, like prerequisite code that need to be there for the system to be initiated and established in the first place. All of these things from previously open source development will likely be significantly decreased now, both in quality and also in number. Also, fundamentally, recognize that the barrier of entry is influenced by the ease of entry into a specific market or into a specific field. In this case, it will be the development of open source AI. Because this is significantly decreasing in terms of like the accessibility, there's also a higher barrier of entry. With the higher barrier of entry, a lot of things are likely to manifest that are generally negative for both people on the ground and also other potential competitors. This looks like it is easier for monopolies and oligopolies, where companies or a single company is in control of the larger market, to form because no one else can reasonably
Right.
threaten to
You're
enter
right.
the market. Sorry, not at this point. Recognize that open source development is quite necessary for a barrier of entry to be lower, because without the prominence and the prevalence of open source development, you are unlikely to be able to access them in an easy way, in a way where you can actually make changes to the AI and create your own models, meaning that the existing models in the market right now, these very prominent companies in the market right now, are likely to be the ones holding ultimate power and at the center of it. This has three negative implications: innovation, the formation of power asymmetries, and inaccessibility for people on the ground. I'll start with innovation. Right. When people cannot build onto the work of others anymore, with the necessary infrastructure and the necessary algorithms being prerequisites inaccessible, it causes there to be a highly monopolized market. With the decline in open source development for AI models and in general, we think that like a monopoly or an oligopoly of these large companies is very likely to form. These companies probably also have a direct incentive of profit, and when there is a limited number of players in this market, a limited number of moving pieces in this market,
You're right.
there's no or sorry, no, there's no need for them to be like developing as good as they previously would be because there is very limited competition. It also means that they are also likely to charge very exorbitant prices for any AI services if they even offer these services to the public in the first place. This is because, again, with a limited number of players that are in this market and are able to access the most like state of the art AI models and state of the art like development for these resources, it is very likely for this power to be abused in such a way due to the lack of demand, due to the lack of supply in this market for the overall price to be manipulated. Okay, moving into the second implication on how monopolies and power asymmetries are likely to form. In the world right now, in the status quo, control of AI is predominantly in the hands of the rich, powerful, and elite. These are higher up people who are more unlikely to care about those that are actually like the people on the ground, the average individuals, because they already have this concentration of power and wealth and influence in their hands. This also means that due to these power asymmetries and the higher barrier of entry, it is more difficult for startups and other individuals, sorry, no, who may want to enter this market to actually have a chance at entering the market. This is also extremely dangerous because with both the destructive and constructive power of AI in general, it is very dangerous for this power to be concentrated in a group of limited entities who we do not know whether they have the best wishes for humanity or not, given like their very extreme profit incentives in this case. Okay, and then moving on into why, so giving a few examples of what misusage could likely look like. This may look like usage of AI for private information that violates rights like privacy. This may look like the weaponization of AI in uses such as military usages that are also greatly detrimental to humanity in general. Finally, then, on why inaccessibility is also a huge implication here, we think that AI models in general are likely to be inaccessible because when they're closed sourced, when you're unable to like incrementally develop them easier, it's likely for them to be paid and at like exorbitant prices, as I've previously analyzed with this economics like analysis. Due to that, it's likely that AI is less accessible for the people on the ground. Moving into the second argument very quickly on legislation. In the status quo right now, people and governments in general do not know a lot about AI. In most circumstances, governments know notoriously very little about AI to begin with. When it is closed source, when it is like even less likely and less easy for you to access these AI developments and for you to access the like background of these AI models and how they operate, it furthers this lack of understanding, which means that legislation is unlikely to be accurate and easy for there to be loopholes. For all of these reasons, the decline of like this is incredibly dangerous, and for those reasons, we highly propose.
Thanks so much for the fine speech. Now let's welcome leader of opposition. Here.
Am I visible and audible?
Can you try to say something again?
Am I visible and audible?
Yes. Yes. Oh, good. Yeah. But try to keep your volume up just like a
Okay.
bit lower right now. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'll start my speech in three, two, and one. ChatGPT is not an open AI, but I can access them every day. So I'm so proud to stand on OO. Let me take down OG's case first before moving on to our side's two arguments. First, they tell us on accessibility. Three things here. Firstly, Judge, we believe they characterize the whole thing completely wrong. So what does this declination actually look like in the first place? It's look like A, big tech companies, i.e. Google, that spend millions of dollars on the AI developments that are shifting towards closed source models to protect their investments. But B, instead of open source releases, companies now provide API based access, e.g., OpenAI's GPT-4. This means users can still interact with AI daily, like AI models daily, but cannot modify or study their inner working. So none of what LG said about accessibility is true. ChatGPT is not OpenAI, but people can access them every single day. So their side's harm is completely that worse in the first place. Secondly, let's talk about innovation. Two things here. Firstly, open source AI made it easy for competitors to copy models rather than develop new ones. Now, AI companies must differentiate themselves through faster, more powerful, and safer AI systems. Means competition will actually be more on the outside of the house because we support declination. Secondly, then, it is not only one big tech company. Big tech companies will compete with each other, which is not limited to one. So competition will still happen, and we believe monopoly won't happen in the first place. First argument then on security concerns and ensure accountability. George, we believe currently in the status quo, open source AI can easily be misused for harmful purposes, including deep fakes, autonomous weapons, and large-scale disinformation campaign. Keeping advanced AI models regulated allow for more oversight and regulations, reducing any potential risk. The unrestricted availability of open source AI models creates significantly security risk because bad actors currently can modify and misuse these models without oversight of any many of the regulations which we as OO think outweighs any other possible harm or possible benefits that government's bench may bring up into the debate. We think security is the most important thing we should consider into the debate, and we're happy to make a stance here. 3 reasons why security cannot be guaranteed on government sides. 3 reasons why it is true. Firstly, lack of oversight in open source AI. When AI models are open source, anyone can access it, modify it, and deploy them without restriction. Judge, why is it so bad then? Because this makes it impossible to track or regulate how AI is used. The big companies literally can do nothing to the bad actor that will misuse the technology for its own good. And because of development AI, it will become more and more dangerous because AI right now is becoming more and more advanced. Secondly, malicious applications. Open source AI lowers the technical barrier for harmful actors to create deepfakes or misinformations or the cyber attacks, right? With those AI, we think on now is later. Companies control access through licensing, API restrictions with safety filters, reducing the chance of AI abuse. Open source AI models like ChatGPT, like being fine-tuned to generate convincing fake news and propaganda. One of the greatest example will be China and Russia, that they just generate like those fake social media posts to manipulate public opinion. Certainly then, why we think in comparative that companies have incentive to ensure safety and why it is just simply better on government sides. 2 things here. Firstly, AI companies face public scrutinies, legal accountability, and reputational risks. If they are like AI's misuse, they have the natural incentive to actually regulate AI with their heart or narrow side of the house, because literally their own company is tied with AI. Secondly, then, what does this mean in comparative to what its OG is trying to depict is this encourages them to develop stronger safeguard, conduct risk assessments, and following ethical AI principle, something that doesn't happen in uncontrolled open source environments. Judge, a comparative here is simple. Is that when all AI are like actually regulated company and like regulatory bodies can enforce guidelines, restrict access, and monitors use to prevent harm or a bad actor to like use the AI for its own good. Before I move into my second argument, POI from closing. Okay, 3, 2, 1, let me move on.
Hello.
Better public as a whole already over time. 2 layers. Firstly, quality to ensure the quality of AI. Quality of AI, right? The decline of open source AI is beneficial to the public because it ensures that AI models are A, well maintained, B, accurate, and C, aligned with ethical standard. Open source AI, we have accessibilities, will lead to fragmented and inconsistent ecosystem where different versions of AI models are modified irresponsibly. This can result in bias, misinformation, and unreliable AI systems that harm society rather than help it. Secondly, under control, AI like models go through rigorous internal testing, continuous improvements, all those tests before like actually releasing it, right? This ensures that AI systems adhere to legal and ethical standard, benefiting users with trustworthy and well-maintained AI. Second layer here, then, we believe there will be more competition among big tech companies. It's encouraged competition because not big tech companies are competing with each other. 2 things here. A, since state-of-the-art AI models are no longer freely available, companies must invest in research and development like criteria, R&D, to stay ahead, leading to higher quality AI and better services for consumers. Basically, more advanced technology, and we tell you because they have the actual natural incentive to do so, they will do it. Secondly, then, open source AI made it easier for competitors to copy models rather than develop new ones. Now, AI companies must differentiate themselves through faster, more powerful, and safer and better AI systems. This drives billions of dollars in AI research to create more efficient, ethical, and high-performance AI model. The endpoint analysis in this argument, right, Judge, is we just think it's better for public in general. And then, Judge, let me do some weighing in the end of my speech. Why is our side's 2 argument debate winning and outright everything? And let me do some weighing. 3 things here. Firstly, we tell you there will be better regulatory mechanism, meaning those bad people cannot like take risk of it. And secondly, we tell you the potential risk of like those advanced AI being misused. Thirdly, and most importantly, right, is that we're happy to trade off everything down government's bench. They say why? Because A, we believe public safety is the most important thing to debate. It's all right, everything. B, we think governments have a natural incentive and innate obligation to do so. Why? Because we think they need to like ensure public safety as they sign a social contract. So the endpoint analysis in our two argument is that because we think on our side in comparative, there will be regulatory mechanism and those like big tech companies to actually follow like the AI as it's not open anymore. It can like avoid misuse. It can let the governments regulate better and see this will be more competition. Like, there will be more competition and like basically people can use it and public will benefit. And for all of reasons, we think we win on a metric of vulnerability, metric of scale, metric of like whatsoever. And for that, I'm so proud to stand on OO. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the first speech. DPM, please.
All right. So I will also prefer rule POIs. Okay, I'm setting up my timer. Wait a second. Okay. And if everyone's ready, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. We want a world where AI is used properly with security and there's more innovation. I believe the two main clashes debate are basically innovation and security. So I'll talk about these two clashes thoroughly. First, let's talk about the first clash about security, right? So what OO generally brought up here is they say actually when there's closed source, it's actually better for the security because when it is open source, everybody is going to use use the AI to do several things like cyberbullying or etc. But we don't really believe this is true because on both sides it's symmetrical that the criminals are able to get AI sources, right? Because on our side they can use AI, they can get AI sources by buying it. Like on either side they can get AI sources by buying from certain companies. So we say even if it's terrorism or even like someone is going to weaponize AI, they are able to access it anyway. But the main difference here is on our side, at the very least, the legislation or the government or the police is able to access AI models better than their side. Because on our side, on the counterfactual, where all these AI models are being open source, this means for example, the police is able to access the fundamental logic of AI models, getting used thoroughly, they can just use it every now and then. On their side, if certain companies have the incentive to help these criminals to do these AIs, they can just suddenly close, for example, ChatGPT to do not allow the police to use it, right? Then if this is the circumstance, then you're unable to forbid all of these crimes from happening, which means on our side, at the very least, the police is able to control this in a better way. But secondly, to further extend my partner's point, we believe on our side there's going to be more legislation. This is mainly because on the counterfactual, where most of the AI models are being open source, it's able for the government or the legislation branch to understand the current level of AI or what it does, right? Of understanding what AI or what it does, or like the fundamental logic of how this is developed, is a fundamental of having a proper law. This is generally because when you're having law, you need to regulate like specific details of the use, right? And only when you're able to understand the basic logic of AI models when it's open source, you are able to get better legislation. Or even if we take their best case, even if they say, okay, governments can establish laws on either side, we believe it is on our side where the public is able to understand the law more because it is open source. Everybody is able to access the fundamental logic of AI models if they want, right? When they're able to understand the law more, it's more likely that this law is going to be implemented smoothly, where there's going to be less hate speeches or less polarization or resentment in society for the people who don't understand the law. So generally, we believe on our side for this clash, we get better, so we get a better society because we have better laws, but also the police is able to regulate these AI models because they are able to access AI, the fundamental ideas of AI models in the counterfactual when it is open source. Now, let's move on to the second clash, mainly of innovation. They are basically telling us that when it is closed source, it attracts more people to work in these AI models. But you need to be aware for the fact that, like my partner already characterized to you, AI models need a lot of like money for research and development for the fundamental blocks, right? And only big companies are able to do this because small companies does not have enough money to do this. So on their side, what happens is actually there are a lot of teenagers who gets graduated from really high colleges, but they're unable to access or further develop AI models because it's just too expensive for them to do so. It's very unlikely that they're able to get these kind of resources of the fundamental blocks in order to establish further research and development because the barrier of entry is just so high. Only the biggest companies, for example, OpenAI or Google, etc., is able to do further research and development on this. And we believe comparatively, even if we take their best case, where like some like people is going to go to these very big companies, we think our side is still better because on our side, every person who wants to further develop the AI is able to access the fundamental ideas of AI models. They can establish their own great ideas on these as long as they get the open source of the AI models. On their side, most of the people are unable to do so because individuals just does not have the money. So like even if you get great idea, you get stuck in the middle because just you cannot further develop it. Which means on our side, there's more innovation because everybody in society is engaging with the material where everybody is trying to develop this with their great ideas. When there's piece after piece of development, we believe on our side, the society is going to be developing faster because more and more people is going to develop AI models, and AI models generally going to be better for the society. Now, moving on to kind of like additional clash, which only my partner engaged in, where our opponents didn't refute on. Basically, accessibility and power asymmetry. We believe this is very, very important. Let's talk about accessibility. We told you that when like AI is open source on the counterfactual world, there's going to be more accessibility because AI-based products is going to be comparatively cheaper. This looks like AI-based new energy cars or AI-based companions for the old people who are unable to move or like unable to hold their lives themselves. This is mainly because on their side, when like even if we take their best case, which their categorization is basically everybody is able to access ChatGPT, but just don't understand the fundamental idea, we still believe like these, for example, new energy cars or like AI companions are unable to get access because it's just products. It's not the big models itself. When it is open source, these, for example, new energy car industry or companies, they can just get these AI models and put it onto that car. But on their side, these companies need to buy these AI models from the companies, right? They cannot just directly accessing it because directly accessing it means potential risks, right? When like suddenly when some companies just want to ban these kind of like uses because they want to make profit. Because I believe companies have the initial incentive to gain money out of this. So I believe it's on our side where when the companies not really need to buy these AI models from certain companies, it's more accessible to the public because people are able to get more AI in their daily life, which means convenience. And we believe this is very important because this is an observation in the microscope, which didn't come up from the opinion opposition. To quickly summarize, I believe we proved to you several things. Number one, we proved to you why even if taking our opponent's best case, we have better security because at the very least, the legislation and the police is able to access AI models on our side. But secondly, there's going to be more innovation because more talented people is able to be engaged in this kind of like ground. But thirdly, we say that there's going to be more accessibility for the public in a microscope because generally it's going to be cheaper. For all these reasons, please support for OG. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the fine speech. Now let's welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Audible and visible.
Oh, can I try to say something?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's all good. Yes.
Okay. I'll start in 3. Okay. Oh yeah, pronouns are she, her. I'll take verbal POIs. I'll start in 3, 2. 3 contributions in this speech. Firstly, we'll explain how open source AI models even work in the status quo. Secondly, we'll ask whether AI is actually good at all, and this was something that was never proved by them, and we didn't hear enough response as to why AI was not very good in the first place. But thirdly, we'll just understand the fact that then on our side of the house, you probably get better regulation. That will be our second clash. Firstly, then, how do open source AI models even work in the first place? Firstly, I think it uses contributions from all over the internet. So it's basically like the AI source of like Wikipedia, for example, uses internet from all over the web, and I guess information from all over the web. And note that there isn't a lot of discernment because a lot of the time you just don't have the incentive to click through all the pages. Generally, you just don't have enough capacity to do so. That was why generally you just use contributions from all over the internet, even if it was false in the first place. But secondly, I think people who create it are generally biased in some way. That looks like, for example, Elon Musk creating OpenAI. He's very Trump-oriented right now, and that is why likely, if you use OpenAI, it likely has a lot of Trump propaganda because Elon Musk created OpenAI. He's like one of the chairmen of OpenAI, and that was why it likely just followed his wishes. But thirdly, note how it's extremely accessible. That was to say, if you turn to Google, if you have a cough, it's generally easier to do so than going to the doctors, and that's why you turn to Google in the first place, or Google Bard, or Microsoft Edge like AI. If you have like some problem that you need to fix, that was because you just often had an optimism bias. You don't understand if it's that bad, and generally just seems a lot more accessible in the first place. The second thing I'll do in the speech is just on the question of whether AI is actually good in the first place. I know this is something that was never proved by them, and so even if what they say was true, and like apparently increasing AI was really good or something, and like you apparently get more regulation, we just note that this is probably not a really good thing in the first place. Like AI probably isn't very good for a lot of people. They say that this perpetuates inequality and higher barrier of entry, and it's generally less accessible. 3 main responses. I think firstly, our stance is that we just don't want them in the first place because all of the problems we already illustrate in the introduction, right? We tell you has contributions for all of the internet. It's very unqualified. And secondly, the people who create it are generally politically biased in some way. That was why we already tell you that our stance is we don't want that many in the first place. But secondly, even if that is not true, we're just unclear as to why AI was so good in the first place. And thirdly, we think we don't want AI to be so accessible because it just takes away things like jobs. People use it to write debate speeches. You can use it to write a lot of things that you probably just usurp a lot of the stuff that you do in the status quo. For example, it's very easy now to use this to to be someone's accountant, for example, and that just takes away the job of an accountant in the status quo. That was why generally just took away things like jobs. Empirically, that was a really bad thing. We then tell you though that AI was really bad, and increasing it just made it even worse for 3 main reasons. Firstly, it had lots of misinformation and deepfakes. I don't think there was ever enough response to what we told you about misinformation. Deepfakes are used to influence politically and really badly. But secondly, it was just going to be harder to detect then on their side of the house. Things like education, less people just opted into it because you use AI to do everything. For common people, this is incredibly bad because you now have less people likely going to the job market, going to university because there was no incentive to do when you could just use AI to write your stuff. Less people who are even qualified to make the AI in the first place. And that was why you caused even more gradual generation decline. Innovation then just does not happen in the long term. And that's why we think we just make the claims no. But thirdly, note the status quo. And that is to say we likely think that what we support is just less and less creation of AI models. Therefore, we agree maybe there will be worse quality AI models, but that means people don't want to use it as much. And that's why you're able to help people keep jobs in the status quo. You probably have better long-term future and outside of the house. We think we live very peacefully of a society without AI for thousands of years. We're just unclear as to why you needed AI to function in the first place. Note how the increased accessibility meant that you likely had more usage on outside the house when it wasn't so accessible and you only had 2. Even in our worst case, where they were really, really good, it just probably still meant that less people opted into it because it was less accessible in the first place. Before I go into the second clash, I can take a peek.
UI?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, your partner just tell us that on either side, normal people can access AI models. But right now, you tell us common people using AI models is really bad. Aren't you contradicting with your partner's impacts?
No, I don't think I am, because we tell you that in the status quo, maybe that happens, but we think that in the long term, you're generally less likely going to have people using as much of the AI, because we tell you that the AI is likely going to be really bad. So we're talking about the long term, not what happens in the status quo. In the long term, probably less people on the outside of the house use AI because AI just becomes far worse when you don't have as much funding. If it just grows smaller and smaller because of the fact that generally less people opt into it, there's less accessibility, and that's why you just create a cycle of less accessibility. When less people use it, less people know about it, less people share it to their friends. friends, and therefore people just don't use it as much. The third thing I'll just do in this speech is on the clash of better regulation. They say that this causes a lot of like oligopolies and like monopolies and problems like that, which then cause worse like of AI in the first place. Three main responses. Firstly, you cannot just break a monopoly or oligopoly with a small startup unless they have lots of money. And I think they literally admit it, right? Most of the people in the world who want to start up AI in the status quo have likely already done so, at least started to do so. That is because, firstly, it's very innovative and new. It's very interesting. That's why the richest people who can't afford this has already done it, because that means like generally gives them more money if they're the first few to do it. And that's why if you don't want to do it, then like just likely means you haven't done it already. And that means like you likely have even more of the misinformation, bad things on their side, because we would just deny the fact that you have more people opting to creating AI in the first place. But secondly, I note that like it's likely you had a lot of money put into it, and not enough people in the status quo are billionaires who can like afford to like create these open AI models. Just cost a lot of money, and that's why people in the status quo on both sides of the house likely just don't want to do it. And that's why the people who can afford to do this likely already have done so in the first place. But secondly, I would note the fact that competition does not always result in better quality and more regulation. I think when you like increase the competition on their side, likely say more advanced, more convincing, and generates more information to help people write out their essays or something like that. That means even more likelihood for AI being used really badly. And just note the fact that we already explained that AI is really bad because it often have lots of misinformation. But thirdly, even if you take their best case, which is still really bad, we think it's still really bad, in which you have more and more models coming out. Empirically, firstly, it takes away jobs. But secondly, when you have competitors, you cause even more sensationalization because you want someone to pick you over another AI model. That means even more fake news and even more flashy fake stuff, because that makes people choose you over another. You often have the optimism bias. Now AI tries to now cater to you. We then told you why it was likely far better on our side of the house, because we tell you that you likely have better quality on our side of the house in terms of information. It was generally less accessible because there are less in the first place, but so people don't actually believe in it as much, and therefore people are less likely to use it in the first place. But secondly, you likely have the incentive to show a really good site and maintain its like magical air as like one of the few floundering, like I guess, companies. That was why it was very different to competitors. Like you were not competing against other competitors, you're competing against a threat of irrelevance in a very worst case. Therefore, you had the incentive to become a better corporation. It's more likely you're incentivized to become a better corporation, become more moral, because you realize that people in the status quo opted out of you because you were shown as fake and really bad. However, when you had 100 other competitors market very similar things, you became incentivized to sensationalize with more claims. What was the bottom line of this case then? Firstly, we just explained that you likely had less AI, and that was a completely acceptable and actually really good thing to do, because AI just took away things like jobs. It was really bad because you just could use it to cheat and stuff like that. But secondly, even if that wasn't true, we just likely proved that we had better AI on our side of the house, so we win on both premises. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you so much for the first speech. Now let's welcome the member of government to stand the lower house debate here.
Am I clearly visible and audible?
Yes, you are perfect, fella.
Okay. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the simple fact in today's debate is that AI is a matter of international geopolitics. AI is a matter of whether the US government wants China to have access to these AI models because they choose to protect their local economy, because they want to be front runners in the AI world. So proud to propose. I think OO are firstly already out. They literally want people to stop using AI. And I also like to note to OO that this is not a value judgment of AI. We only want to discuss whether AI should be something where people have access to, where foreign companies and other companies competing with you should have the access to these AI models so that they're able to improve on these models. I'll start with a few technical calls. Firstly, on OG. On monopolies, I think monopolies are symmetrical in both worlds. And the simple reason here is that bigger companies will always have the best and highest amount of manpower. No matter how much of open source information you have, if you're not able to understand this information because you do not have the manpower, you do not have the skills on your side, you're unable to utilize these information as well. So monopolies do exist. CG from first takes the trade-off that only a few companies across the world will be able to develop at state-of-the-art large language models because they have the manpower, because they have the money. Secondly, on legislation coming from OG, I think they try to tell you how open source means that the government can better understand these models. I like to note to you how regulation is unlikely to happen to a very large extent because these AI companies are likely to be very powerful because they are huge lobbyists part of this company as well. And these companies are likely to tell the government that if you want your country to be front runners in the AI market, you must allow us to develop freely and for us to truly experiment through our methods. So this is why the government is unlikely to have an incentive to regulate these AI programs. The government also has an incentive to develop as much as possible so that these programs are better than their foreign adversaries. Even if you don't buy that, we tell you the cost and manpower to regulate AI is very, very high. Because these AI models keep learning and learning and learning, you need people to physically be there to regulate these AI models before, instead of just going in and looking at how they choose to code their programs, because these programs improve over time and develop over time. It's unlikely that the government has an incentive. It's unlikely that the government has the resources to do so. Moving on to a few responses on how, number one, closed source means that the governments do not know the in and outs of their operations. I think this is symmetrical in most of the tech market in relation to regulation, because the government will always run to regulate apps like Facebook, but will never get the access to their algorithms, because these companies are private companies which have their personal incentives. The only way the government can regulate all these tech companies in status quo is for the government to give fines to any wrongdoing that happens. So I tell you, it's symmetrical when this regulation happens. Secondly, on having too many competitors, we tell this is precisely what is good about these large language models, because this creates an incentive for companies to develop better AI models and cheaper products, because you always want to be the industry leader. You always want to have the biggest market cap for your company to be successful and profitable in the long term. We tell you companies are still profitable because if, for example, ChatGPT, they have a free track. They also have a paid track where they're able to earn money. Our stance with CG is quite simple. We want what is best for the AI industry and for the users, and we achieve this uniquely because people share information, because open source models enable development, which I'll give you examples in my speech, in my arguments later. Now, few pieces of framing crucially missed out by both opening houses, right? What do these AI platforms necessarily look like? We tell you these are not things like military warfare AI. These are not things like deepfake AI, because these companies naturally have an incentive to protect their own information, because these are companies based on profit. They only develop their AI for specific uses. CG tells you it's more likely that open source models come in the form of large language models. Large language models, for example, OpenAI's ChatGPT, for example, Google's Gemini. The simple reason is that these AI companies operate on training these AI models on information available in the internet. The reason why they're likely to be open source is that companies want people to understand how these programs work. They also want their adversaries to understand how these programs work, so that when they develop on these programs, these companies are able to copy them back in return. So we tell this the reason why it's likely to only apply on large language models. Now, secondly, how have open source models been used? It's not necessarily copying, it's improvement and advancement. I think this wasn't clear from OG, because ChatGPT is seen as one which kickstarted this AI boom. Other companies improved on it to create better programs. For example, China's DeepSeek. Because of weaker hardware that they have in China, they had to find more efficient means to compute information. And now in turn, Meta's Llama in the US is copying them again. So this is how innovation is happening, because people copy each other, people develop on each other and find more efficient ways of achieving the same goal in the market. So finally, on setup, what does this decline look like? We tell that LLMs, which were open source, become closed source to protect profits and to serve the government incentives of hampering the development of their foreign adversaries. We tell this is necessarily not good, because, for example, if you operate in a vacuum in the US itself, the capitalistic market is likely to hamper development to a certain extent compared to international development, where everybody is able to improve on similar things. Moving on to my arguments on how overall industry advancement is likely to happen. The reason is because the speed of development is more efficient. Because you do not need to start from scratch over and over again, you just build on existing models which already exist in status quo. For example, in the past, development in the aviation industry saw a huge boom in large part due to the collaboration between America and Europe. They eventually went separate ways through Boeing and Airbus. Now Comac of China has joined the playing field. All these development came so quickly because of the ability of these companies to share information. The aerodynamics were already discovered in the first place, and thus these companies were able to build on these models. This means that companies develop faster, the aviation industry experienced a boom faster than if every company were forced to develop their own aeroplanes individually. The comparative on side of opposition is essentially a waste of time and money to redo what has already been done by others. It's quite simple. I think the problem why OG does not take this on overall industry advancement is because OG do not explain why the quality of AI is likely to be high and why it's likely to be used for wrongdoing. I think OG lose to OO in terms of how AI is likely to be diluted how everybody can enter the AI market. We tell you on quality, costs to develop these AI models are extremely high, so companies want a return on their investment, and this is why they are likely to develop high quality AI programs which are competitive against the other models. We also tell you that LLMs have the singular capability of answering questions, so things like deepfakes are totally different because those models operate totally differently. So we tell you for these reasons, this is why CG wins on the metrics of AI being able to harness better industry advancement because everybody is able to develop on these models. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the fine speech. Now let's welcome the member of opposition here.
All right, just testing if I'm audible.
Yes. Can you try to say something again?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, it's perfect. No worries.
All right. POIs verbally. I'll take 1 and 3. Pronouns he, him. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. The major contention in this debate, then, is not how many people use AI, rather than which side protects individuals who do use AI. Like it or not, panel, everyone uses AI these days because of the convenience of it. So this immediately locks out our opening out of this debate when they tell you that they don't want people to use AI a lot, hence they don't protect the actual people on the ground who do use AI, right? Now, before I continue, I'll be doing a few clarification, doing one substantive rebuttal then. Firstly, we think how this looks like then is we think that privatization is the best course of action, where AI models then should be developed by corporations independently with their own measures and controls and the ability to determine what they want to reveal to the public. So this means like training data, code, etc. And all of these will remain privately within the corporation's hands. Secondly, I want to clarify the major stakeholders debate because this was never proven to us and never clarified through all three houses. So firstly, I think the major stakeholder then is which side can actively protect the average person, right? Because the average person doesn't have all of the insight and doesn't know all of the safety measures of AI. So they just use it for their daily purposes. And the reality is that everyone uses AI, right? So I think they're the most major stakeholders debate. And since they use AI so much, I think whichever side protects them the most then wins this debate. Lastly, I'm going to deal with a rebuttal coming out from CG in terms of the incentives of government when they tell you that there are not likely going to be any good safety measures or legislation either way because of corporate lobbying, right? One response to this, I think lobbying is only effective insofar as to the extent that governments can actually be re-elected. If ChatGPT or Microsoft do horrible things with their AI and steal information in order to progress their AI, I'm pretty sure if they get caught, there's going to be a large backlash from the public against it, and then this forces governments to actually regulate this, right? Specifically, note this is exclusive to closing half when we tell you that this call out and backlash doesn't happen on both government benches when you can't regulate 1,000 different AI models, right? Which I'll explain later, right? So this level of regulation and this level of call out, the incentives behind government is that they want to be reelected, given that they're democracies, right? When they allow for these bad things to perpetuate, with these corporations abusing the people and stealing their information, when there's this backlash, they will be actually forced into pushing out better legislation then, right? Now, moving on to my substantives, I'll be pushing two major extensions in this debate. Firstly, in terms of how we get better legislation on our side of the house, and secondly, about how we beat out our opening half in terms of security risks, right? 4 layers to this. Firstly, panel, when you centralize the development of AI to a few entities, it better allows regulatory standards to be enforced, right? This then simplifies the legislation process behind the development of AI. Why is this the case? We think there's going to likely be increased corporate responsibility. I think it's generally easier to hold corporations accountable for the things that they do when it comes to formalizing legislation panels. It's simply much more easier to hold major corporations accountable because of things like their shares, their stocks, as well as how big they are, right? They can't just do something bad and disappear and run away somewhere else, right? Unlike individuals like hackers or people who have malicious intent who develop these AI models, right? It's simply much more easier and much more safer to centralize everything and make sure that it's regulated by, like, let's say 10 major corporations in the entire world, right? When certain individuals create new controversial AI models, it's incredibly hard to regulate. When legislation requires large amounts of bureaucratic red tape to push out, when there's thousands of these things happening at the same time, when thousands of these AI models are getting pushed out, it's going to put the bureaucracy into a deadlock. And on our side of the house, we're able to solve this to a large extent. And we told you it's likely that these individuals are going to be developing malicious models. We'll prove that in our second extension about why there's likely going to be a lot of these malicious models being pumped out and why the incentives are to pump out malicious models, right? What do we do on our side then, panel? On our side house, we recognize the most important reality within this debate, where the majority of the population uses AI. But note, we told you these individuals likely aren't going to be informed about the intricacies of AI, nor the risks, right? When we're better able to protect these individuals by passing the regulation and development of AI, we're better able to ensure that AI actually, the people that use AI and the AI that is being used is actually safe and not malicious, instead of thousands of different models created with people using thousands of different AI models that are incredibly hard to regulate then. This is why we win over opening, and this is why we win over CG, in that we protect the people the most, right? Panel OO then immediately gets flipped over when they neglect the most vulnerable stakeholder, the individuals who don't know how to access open sources, and this is why we win then. Now, moving on to the second extension then, in terms of security risks, right? I think we win over OO in this specific sense because OO's argument was frankly underanalyzed and under-mechanized insofar as they never posit to you the logical link they needed, and they only touch upon the scale of security risk. And let me tell you, security risk is a big thing within this debate, which we'll vertically extend upon, hence why we'll positivity analysis needed to mechanize their impacts in the first place, right? A few layers of analysis. Firstly, I think the issue in this debate isn't a matter of innovation nor progression, but a multitude of different factors that come into this, such as accountability, security, and ethicality. You cannot simply say innovation is then better off and say that the only reason open source should be encouraged is because innovation is better, there's going to be better progression, right? I don't think innovation exists in a vacuum. Things need to be considered, like the safety and whether the AI is actually ethical, and a lot of these things need to be considered, which CG just doesn't do because they already proved to you that they're willing to abandon the safety of the individual people who use AI for the sake of getting an edge against China, getting an edge against DeepSeek, getting an edge in innovation and progression of AI. This is why CG loses this entire debate, because they do not care about the most vulnerable stakeholder, and because they do not care about the most vulnerable stakeholder. Moving on to the second analysis then, when you allow for the public to access these source codes, panel, I don't think Joe, who sits on the front porch reading newspaper every day, is actually going to use or do anything with said code, right? I think this deals with OG's point about barrier of entry argument when we tell you that the real people who are likely going to use it are likely going to be individuals with ill intentions or actual incentives to do so. For example, hackers who train their own AI models to help them, right? Scammers who want to who create deepfakes to scam people, right? A lot of these people actually want to use these open source AI models for malicious intent, right? Because they don't actually have any other incentives for it to do so, right? I think in status quo, we've recognized the severity of AI scams and threats when we see a lot of advertisements, even panel, the Singaporean police force note, have begun efforts to counter AI deepfake scams, right? And I think these harms sure are symmetrical, but are amplified much more on the side of government on both benches when you allow anyone to have the ability, or anyone who knows the intricacies of AI, for example, IT developers, AI developers, right, to actually have the ability to edit and train mass scale AI models, right? Because we tell you when you create a model, creating a model takes up a lot of capital to do so, and the average person, even if you're extremely skilled in doing so, just cannot do it. Even experienced hackers cannot create independent and new models, and they don't have the resources to do so. What they can do is edit and take out pre-existing AI models and train it to their own liking and train it to their own use. So panel, the impacts that are simple. We already proved to you why there's likely going to be a lot of people who have malicious intents regarding AI and are likely going to use it for bad intentions. The risk of AI is so much more amplified on their side of the house, and I think this stifles innovation so much more when people see so much controversy surrounding AI. People now are already scared of AI, with many saying that there's going to be a next Skynet event, right? Although an exaggeration, this only shows the concerns surrounding AI attacks skyrocket. So this likely will cause a lot of concern to skyrocket. People are going to demand more stringent regulations and curbing AI development when they start to get scared of AI, when such a large-scale threats and malicious attacks come out from AI, with thousands of unregulated AI models stealing people's information, deepfaking people. Because of this stifles both innovation on their side of the house and breaks their metric on safety. We win on these two metrics. We lock out OO from the debate. We win this on side of closing opposition.
Thank you so much. Gavin, please.
No, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
No, I heard. Okay, my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. So you have to know that first I would like to start with some responses. So what was pushed out by the opposition side was open source actually allows the copy of models and there's no differentiation. So you have to know that open source gives the ability to everyone to try different ideas, approaches, and techniques. You have to know that the fact that a base model is available to all doesn't mean that everyone will use it in the same way. So what actually matters here to differentiate these people, you have to know that branding, services, and the customer's experience matter more compared to what they have on their side of the house. So you have to let you know that AI is a tool and it's not a product. So AI models, being an open source, is a tool or a component in a larger product or a service offering. So how does the company actually stand out? So the company can stand out by creating a strong brand. They can offer superior customer services, or they can provide a unique experience that complements what the AI technology could actually be. So let me give you an example. So a company offering personalized health diagnostics powered by AI might use the same models as another company, but the reputation for customer care, easier to use interfaces, and reliable, trusted results could set them apart. So this value lies in the complete experience rather than just the AI itself. So the next point that was pushed up by the opposition side is how that a person can hide whatever they're doing. And while this closed source AI, there will be less the mistakes can be held accountable on the major corporations themselves. So we have to let you know that unlike a closed source environment where a company can hide its mistakes and misconduct behind the walls of the company itself. So you have to know that open source projects are public and traceable. Every contribution, every bug or error is logged in and is put in the system for as long as the system exists on there. So as a contributor makes a harmful mistake, it's identified easily, it can be corrected and also be
POI.
rolled back by others in the community. Sorry, no. So it ensures that technology remains ethical and safe also. So the last rebuttal on how safety. We on CG, we actually do not just abandon safety. We tell you how whatever these AI models look like, regulation does not differ if it's open source or closed source. Closed source. So regulation is unlikely to happen on a very large extent. Huge lobbies, as these companies are very large. So the government also has an incentive to allow these programs to develop as much as possible to be better than their foreign adversaries. So even if you do not buy that, the cost and the manpower to regulate AI is very high. So you actually need very good expertise and constantly follow every development of AI to successfully regulate it. Now moving on to clashes of today's debate. So what the clash of today's debate lies on the fact that how a company makes money by using a closed source AI versus doing the right thing. So the clash here is companies want to profit from their AI models, but there's a worry that moving to open source will not allow them to do so. So how we tell you on CG, they do not actually lose out on these profits. So by doing these open source models, they can actually offer paid services or premium features. Even if the core idea of the AI models is open source, the companies can build premium services around it. You have to know that they can offer identical additional features, more powerful versions of the AI, or dedicated customer support that users pay for. They want to provide a system. Let me give you an example. Meta Lava provides an open source models, but also offers cloud-based services or API access, where users pay
POI.
based on their usage. Sorry, no. So the next reason why they'll actually not lose out on these profits in the first place is how they have partnerships and integrations of these open source AIs into the models. So how does this actually work? Companies that offer open source AI models can form partnerships with other businesses or organizations that want to integrate their AI tools into these services and products. So if you look at the long-term cost, these actually provide a long-term revenue for the company itself. So you have to ask also, how do we actually benefit the AI scale globally on CG side? So we accelerate innovation. Open source models allow everyone, anyone, anywhere to access
Recording
these good
stopped.
AI tools. This democratizes the AI development, which speeds up the innovation as developers and researchers can build upon each other's. A researcher in one part of the world
Recording in
can use this
progress.
they quickly use these open source models developed by a team in another country, combining it with their own ideas to create something new. This rapid exchange of ideas actually results in faster breakthroughs. So what's the worst case, best case scenarios of both sides of the houses? So you have to look at our best case scenario for our side of the house first. The best case scenario is we're able to have faster innovation and we're able to better AI in a whole. So what's the worst case of our side? Open source AI. So we have the abuse and the misuse of technology where there's a risk of unethical applications, security breaches, or even malicious uses of AI models. So we also have a potential of harm. Now let's look at why actually open source AI overcomes this best best case scenario of the closed source AI. So what the closed source AI's best case scenario is actually they're controlled by a few companies. They might have limited access and they have hindered
POI.
innovation. So why open source overcomes this? How does CG actually weigh against OG? CG uniquely provides a legwork for OG's case to operate. So OG did not tell us how development of AI was likely to happen more than a way of a lion liner. So CG's first uniquely told you that the sharing of these AI codes could happen in a way where the other actors are able to develop all these existing models. So on monopolies, we also provided the legwork of how markets are simply unfair because of existing finances or manpower. So moving back on how open source AI actually overcomes the closed source AI's best case scenario, increased flexibility. So open source models actually quickly adapt to emerging needs, challenges, and fostering faster innovation. We're able to solve problems with more users and more help from all the people around the world. So next, we also have accelerated innovation, which means the whole case of today's debate is how do these open source AI actually benefit the whole AI globally. So the open source AI approaches makes more diverse multi inputs, leading to rapid advancement, different solutions from different people. So the last part of why we actually outweigh the best case scenario of the opposition side is we have a better response to threats. So problems like security risks can be addressed quickly through the global cooperation of the open source community, while closed source model may struggle to keep up with emerging threats due to the lack of usage of AI on their side. So what the conclusion of today's debate and why CG actually takes this win? So in the end, we have to know that open source AI fuels rapid development, ethical development, and equal access for all, driving breakthroughs through industries. So while a closed model might offer control, they stifle the competitions and slow progress. And we tell you again, competition is not a bad thing. Competition is the thing that chooses people so they can go out the way to push AI across its boundaries to be the best and to be identified differently from what other people can be. So with a global community behind this open source AI, is the key to faster solutions, a more inclusive future, and it paves the way for a faster and more equitable world. So with that, I'm proud to oppose. I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Opposition Whip. Here.
Hi, wait, give me a second while I open my cam. Come on.
Yeah, you're all good.
All right. Hope I'm audible and visible. I'll start my speech in 3, 2. Right. I think then closing gap is immediately wiped out of the get-go of the debate as soon as they fail to acknowledge the idea that these vulnerable stakeholders are going to be the individuals in itself who fail to not know how to use forms of AI, who don't know how to access the codes of forms of AI. I think both all sides in this debate then fall onto it. But I'll still engage with each house by explaining how, even if we don't talk about the scale of these things, how then do we still win? Now, how I'm going to structure my speech then is really simple. First, I'm going to go through a few layers of callouts. Then I'm going to go through government whip. Then opening government, then finally opening opposition and how will we over them. First, let's go to closing government. What does closing government deposit to you? They deposit to you two main things. Number one, how companies more likely are able to hide these forms of mistakes, right? I think then the inherent issue with this is that one, most likely companies are unable to hide these forms of mistake or hide these forms of malicious intent. Why? Because number one, these forms of companies most likely have government regulation onto them. Because like open AI not being able to take forms of data, this looks like DeepSeek not being able to take these different things. I think to an extent, these forms of privacy and these forms of things are still able to unable to go through these companies because these companies most likely have a law abiding them. Comparatively towards open source AI, when you release an AI, let's say you are a really famous hacker, when you release an AI, more likely these things don't have much regulation. Because note that when you have open source and the development of it is going to be so much to the point that to an extent, regulations then are hard to occur. Legislations are hard to place onto, which then immediately flips out OG as well by trying to push on the legislation argument. Second, what the CG tell us? CG also tells us how these AI models then regulation does not differ. I tell you very simple. I think this one argument as well, it proves to you that on opposing government, this argument cannot stand because I know that these ideas of these pushes that this safety on housing government is not going to be as well structured. It's not going to be as well constructed compared to on closing opposition where I deposit to you a counter model where these laws are going to exist. Now, I think then to finally, which is the third thing they try to tell you, right? Note that when Joshua has already continuously POI'd them, they fail to respond to any of them or they fail to take any of them, which is the lack of engagement. Note, as well, they try to think that as long as there is a form of code, it's unsafe, right? But panel, do you CG, do you think that Instagram or TikTok is unsafe because their code is not behind a wall? I tell you then this is the station that we want to deposit them, right? Now, we can tell you then another thing, which is the main argument, right? Is on how there's an overall industry advancement, right? How people don't need to start from scratch and how you're already able to have a step up. I think tells you then that this is then not necessarily important. Why? Because we can look at already in status quo when different forms of AI models are created, even though there is a form of where there is a closed source, right? We can see the recent advancement of DeepSeek suddenly appearing out of nowhere, even though they don't have let's say the best codes from let's say what OpenAI or Google Boy. These forms of things are still able to be developed without these things. Sure, we buy the idea that, okay, in the worst case scenario, we buy the idea that, okay, these things are going to be slower. The development is going to be relatively, evaluation is relatively going to be not as effective, but we tell you that when we deposit an effective solution for you, it's most likely going to be the most solid ground. It's most likely going to be the best one you can have because we spend more and more time developing. We spend from scratch, knowing each code by each thing is going to benefit you as an actor. It's going to benefit the people on the ground, especially if you have users who use these forms of ChatGPT or use these forms of AI models. Now, let's go through then to OG. What does OG then deposit to you? OG then is really simple. A lot of OG's things are flipped immediately by my clash, or Joshua's argument, right? Especially with number one, they push to you an idea that how in their world they're gonna have bad for they try to portray on how we're gonna have bad for legislation because these governments know less of AI. I think Joshua then deposit to you a good argument on how legislation is going to be better, how legislation is going to be more concise and more better in itself because of the innovation of these, because of these big companies who most likely have the most people or the most resources to do so. We are able to then solve these issues. We then are able to deal with these issues, right? And we tell you that when there is postings, it's more easier for you to do legislation because then you only need to target those few big companies. And when a new big company comes onto that, let's say worst case when like new company comes onto that, governments are able to put legislation on them easier compared to when every day there's 5 or 10 new models coming out because of these open sources. Two, they tell us on how then are the lack of innovation. We tell you how on our world we're gonna have more innovation easily, right? Why? The response to this is really simple. We tell you that you can think about it in an intuitive way. Why? Even if let's say ChatGPT being one of the prominent AI right now, being the most famous AI right now, why then is DeepSeek or Google Bard still existing? Innovation still occurs no matter how. But we tell you that when you have these things, you gather, or when you have corporations, then you have more manpower to gather and compete with this. Note that competitiveness in the market is something that exists on both worlds. And on our world, we're able to make sure that it runs at the best. And CO, I think, has the most realistic idea and more realistic technologies towards this. Two, it tells on how monopolization and asymmetry is forming. I think this then is really, really unlikely. That's really, really uncharitable. Finally, let's outweigh OO. How then or CO is going to be the most prominent opposition side, and why opening opposition is immediately locked out of the debate as soon as Joshua starts speaking a single word from his mouth. Now, one, note that in itself, opening opposition never explained to you how on their world they're actually able to benefit the minorities. Where they explain to you that these individuals who are on people on the ground, people who never know how to use AI, and people who don't know how to open and access these forms of sources in the first place, they are unable in itself to be able to access these things. Meaning, one, they have a lack of knowledge towards forms of AI. Meaning, if I have malicious intent towards hacking to your AI, on our world, we are more likely to able to, on their world, on opening, note that they never explain how these things happen, right? Two, on our world, we're able to take down their main push on how these security concerns happen. On our world, number one, we're able to deposit to you a stronger form of analysis on how individuals, on how likely the logical links to how and why these things will be hacked. Who is going to be hacking them? We already explained to you. This is the thing that opening lacked. Opening can deposit to you 4 different arguments, but 4 different arguments were never constructed well and easily taken over by my outweighing. Two, we already told you that no, they never proved to you on how these things are able to bring impact, how the security risks are able to bring impacts. They can deposit to you 6, but no, they never have fully analysis it. Why? Comparatively, you know that on our, I think what Joshua did really well was he explained to you how these forms of AI and how these forms of security risks are going to occur. The step-by-step things on how these malicious intents are going to be created, how these things are executed has all been, I think, barely explained by Joshua. I think this then immediately reads an opening, right? Even if you don't buy the vertical extension, we tell you about a horizontal extension to prove to you, which is a flip from OG, which is that you have more better legislation. This better legislation in the end is going to benefit more people, right? This legislation in the end is going to benefit more people than compared to opening, because instead of benefiting company itself, we allow more and more people around the world to be safer from all these different threats, to be safer from all these different malicious intents. With that, to a better work for AI, for a better development of AI in itself, side by side of CO. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the excellent debate, everybody. Fabulous job and congratulations.